Welcome to our conversation with Angie Cruz. Thank you so much, Angie, for speaking with us about your beautiful debut picture book, Angélica en la Güira. I absolutely love this book. I love that you set it in Washington Heights. I love that it's about a little Dominicana. And it felt very you, even though this is a new genre for you. So my first question is, obviously you are most known for your novels, rooted in the Dominican diaspora. But this is, as I mentioned, your debut picture book. What compelled you to write a picture book? That's my first question.
I've always had an interest. Well, I have a 16-year-old, but when he was little, I was reading a lot of picture books at the time to him. And I realized that the books that he was very attracted to were always those that had repetition and music. And of course, I always wanted him to read books that were more about culture and empowerment. And I didn't see us in this was in 2007 to 2013. I didn't really see our communities represented in books. So I always had this desire to write a book or think about a book that would do kind of the same things I'm doing with Dominicana and Let It Rain, and Let It Rain Coffee and Soledad and How Not to Drown in a Glass of Water, but like for kids. And another thing that I noticed while I was doing book tour is that a lot of my readers for my adult books would come with their children to the readings, and they would give me a copy of Dominicana and say, could you sign this for my daughter? And I would look at their daughter and they're like 5. And I said, oh my God, like you have to wait 10 years to read this book, or, 15, whatever. And it made me think, oh, like, why couldn't I try to put, now that, books like Dominicana have become, you know, are read by so many people, like, why couldn't I write a picture book for the younger readers that are going into my events? And I feel like Angélica en la Güira could literally come out of the page from one of my adult books for sure.
Yeah, and also I think I love Dominicana. That's like my favorite of I love all your novels, but Dominicana is just I and that's definitely that's too heavy for kids. So can you talk to us about the difference between writing a children's book, a picture book versus a novel? Because I've heard that it's harder to write a picture book because they're like less than 1,000 words, the word count, it has to have rhythm and also capture and keep the attention of children. So how is it different?
You know, um, in some ways it's harder because I might have a lot of ideas for picture books. Actually, I'm trying to write one now. I have another book in the works and I have a lot of ideas, but a picture book also requires a kind of magic. Like if you think about the books that people have been reading across generations, right? Like Goodnight Moon, or Where
Oh
the
yeah.
Wild Things Are. Like these books, they have a magic to them that it's almost difficult to pinpoint, except that once you finish the book, there's something you understand deeply about the human condition, right? And I
Mhm.
feel that, it's not just the hungry caterpillar, right? Going through leaves. There's something about it that becomes evocative enough. I guess the work of poetry, it taps into the divine, right? And I think that's what makes it hard, that you could have many, many ideas, but the expectations of children, like children are so smart. Like I think they see through something that when you write a picture book, you want to actually figure out how do you catch that moment that's inexplicable with just plot or just story. And that's what's hard. And then you only have a few like 700 to 1,000 words to tell that
Right.
story. So for me that was hard. And I mean, I love novels because I could get messy in them, and I feel like I have a lot of room to speak of the different characters. And in this one, I have a number of characters, but again, I had to stay very, very focused, and I had to find just the right detail so people understand who they are. So yeah, it was challenging, but it's also really fun to have that constraint.
Right. And I also think the whole what you mentioned about the magic of picture books. and how there's repetition, I noticed like it's almost like every word counts. And
Mhm.
I noticed some of the things you said earlier in the book came back. It was like a circle. And I thought, oh, I see what she's doing. And I think children will see that. And how you mentioned they're very smart and they'll pick up on it. And it'll be a full circle moment for them as well, as you know, as far as like a reader experience. So your main character, Angelica, you know, she is a young Dominicana. She just spent the whole summer in the Dominican Republic. And before she leaves, her abuelo gives her a Güira. And it's not just any Güira, it's a special Güira. It's of generations past, handed generations from generation to generation. You know, obviously, this instrument is huge in our culture, in Dominican culture, and Dominican music. I was curious, what made you decide to center La Guira in this story, to choose this instrument to center the story around, as opposed to, you know, other instruments that are popular in Dominican music?
Well, you know, in Perico Ripiao, there's three instruments. There's the accordion, there's the tambora, and there's la guira. And the guira is the one that actually like keeps the beat. It speeds up the music or slows it down. And I thought, oh, like if you were going to give a instrument to a young girl, you know, like what instrument would you want them to have? And I thought, like, that's a good one. There's a lot of power in that small instrument that actually maybe we take for granted in music, right? But if you pull the guira out of a lot of music, it would be not our music. And I think that what makes Perico Riquiao and merengue like really our music is that you always have these three instruments kind of working together. And you know, and the truth is, like, I'm really interested in the history. As you know, the Dominicana is a historical novel.
Mhm.
And I started looking into the history of Perico Ripiao and the origins of that and thinking about, like, you know, of course, I think, you know, you look at history and there are many different ways of telling this history, but you know, there's the idea that the accordion and la tambora and la guira were all given to the culture by different groups, right? So you would say indigenous groups,
Mhm.
um, you know, African diasporic group, and then actually that's not the way I want to say it. What I want to say is that they come from three different groups, right? So
Mhm.
it's the indigenous, the African, and the European. And these three groups together made this one music in a way. So in a lot of ways, even though Perico Ripiao was something that wasn't allowed, it was kind of uh, sort of in the margins of the culture for a
Mhm.
number of reasons. It was also a moment where a music came, it's like a way that collaboration, let's think of collaboration of these cultures created something that became truly Dominican.
Definitely. And I totally appreciated that aspect of the story. And there's also a beautiful theme in your book about, you know, just the connection to generations past, you know, abuelo, great grandpa, you know, it's like going back generations. I was curious, like, what message were you hoping to send by focusing on this connection to generations past?
You know, I feel like one of the things I've learned as a writer, and I would say as I become more mature as a writer, is
Mhm.
that I'm becoming a better listener. And I feel like listening to older generations, even if we're not always in communication with, we don't always understand their point of view, um, also brings us a kind of wisdom about how things work in the world. And to have a book that shows the importance of holding on to our history, our ancestry, what our elders are giving us, like these objects that have been held on, you know, I actually don't have an object like a Guida. You know, this is not an autobiographical story, but I do have the stories of my family that I hold on to that have been told to me. And sometimes, you know, we could say, ellos están hablando disparate. ¿Qué disparate? You know, and they're also never consistent.
Yeah.
I feel like se ponen a hablar and they're not really consistent with the stories they're telling us. So you don't really know what the truth is. Like, we're like, wait, did pick you up and throw you on a horse and you ran off to the sunset? Or was it something else, right?
And then you get a slightly different version when you talk to someone else who knows
Yes.
the
And,
story.
you know, and even the same person will keep telling you different versions of the story throughout time. And I think regardless of that, I feel like as the holder of stories, right? Like all of us have the capacity to hold on to those stories, to hold on to those objects in whatever way that we want to hold on to them. And it's important because I do think we live in a culture that is invested in the erasure of our culture, and in the erasure of our traditions. So, um, because of that, I think those of us that care have to do everything we can to make sure that what we've learned has not been forgotten, because we don't need to reinvent the wheel, right? Like every time we're born, we don't need to reinvent the wheel. We could actually learn a lot from those who came before us, and we owe a lot to those who came before us.
And I think also just going to like, just if we look at your backlist and just like all your work, that is sort of like the defining, like that is, I can see that you want to preserve our culture, our stories. And, that's why I appreciate your work so much. Because if we don't do that, then no one else will. And I want to talk about, because I chuckled, Angie, when I saw in the book where you were talking about Angélica returning home to the States, and you write, when she returned home to the land of Washington Heights.
Mhm.
And I
Yeah.
thought the neighborhood really does feel like its own land. And of course, it is changing due to so many factors, including, gentrification. But can you tell us about what it meant for you to set another one of your stories in Washington Heights?
Well, first of all, I want to show this image. Like, this is one of my favorite images in the book. This is the moment where she returns to the land of Washington Heights, and she looks so sad.
Yeah,
Luis
she's on.
Batista did an incredible job, I feel, um, with this book. I mean, she really, I think, captured the energy of it. And why Washington Heights? Why Dominican Republic? That's the question.
Well, what did it mean for you to set this story in Washington Heights again? That this is something very familiar to you. That's your hometown, your birthplace, but for this specific story.
Well, again, we're represented in books, right? So in some ways, like for me, like it's exciting to see that there's so many books. Like there's that beautiful book by Lisette Norman, Plátanos Goes with Everything, that has, Washington Heights represented. There's a number of other books that have come out recently, and I think it's really important. And I'm like, there's so many stories that we still need to tell about this rich, vibrant, amazing community. Again, because it's becoming very gentrified, right? So in some ways, I feel like we're holding on to something that maybe is shifting and changing. But for me, when I think about Angélica La Güira, like being in the city, I mean, it's still very much the New York I love and know. Is one where there is music on the streets, and even if it drives me crazy sometimes how loud it is.
Yeah, where you like you're, instead of hearing your heartbeat, you hear the bass of the reggaeton,
Yes,
you know?
sometimes it's hard, but I do think that there is, when you start to, like, it is something that, I go away and then I come back and I instantly feel like at home when I recognize a song,
Yeah.
right? Or when I recognize a smell, or definitely music carries us and transports us, right? So even if, Angelica is away from her family in Dominican Republic, she's also with her family when she plays the sound of
Mhm.
her family,
Yes.
and again, Luz Batista made some really interesting illustrations showing how music, instruments actually hold our community inside of them, which I thought very, very powerful.
And it's so funny because that leads to my next question, which is, what was it like to see the sketches, Luz's sketches? Like, did you get that early glimpse of sketches, and what was that like to see your, words come to life, in illustrate, paired with the illustration, because you're a novelist and editor. So, what was that like? I'd love to know.
It's very fun. I love collaboration, and actually, like, I think, I think the story is fine. I think the illustrations make it great. And I have to say, like, this book definitely it was a collaboration, right? Because it was not only my words. I got a lot of feedback. Again, I leaned on, Lisette Norman, who was more experienced, to look at it and give me advice. Kiani Antigua, who is the translator, her translation helped me make the story better in English. And that was a conversation that we were having. And the same thing about the illustration. When the illustrations were coming up in sketches, like I was allowed to make a lot of notes. I mean, for me, the most important part, I mean, Luz basically brought in the energy. Like this little girl is so cute.
She's so cute. And then also when the Güira is being played, the chiki 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 chiki, like you see the sounds literally come to life with the words and the swishes of color. I love that part.
And she's so cute, right? And like and all the heart, and then when she's sad, she's so sad. And when she's happy, she's so happy. I love the expression, the active, like the action in the stories. And that was very exciting. For me, the most important thing was to show a mixed colored family. Like I wanted like all the shades of our families to be represented. I grew up in a family like that, and I felt like, I wanted to make sure that the family truly reminded folks of what it looks like to be in a Dominican family. And I feel the book does that. You know what I mean? I do think that they were able in the end to represent it that way.
Oh yeah, like how her abuelo, he's a darker skin tone than Angélica. And so we watch as Angélica struggles to fit her Guida in certain spaces at school, even in her own home. Her brother's like, take that somewhere else. So it reminds me of how sometimes certain aspects of our culture do not seem to fit in certain spaces. And can you share more about how did you lead the story there? I found that aspect of the story very interesting because the Guida is super Dominican. She's in Washington Heights, which is, still Dominican. So yeah, can you talk just a little bit about that?
Well, first of all, if I'm taking a guira lesson on Saturday because I've been trying to teach myself how to play the guira, and it sounds awful. It's a horrible sound. It literally is a horrible sound. I'm gonna show you how bad I am. Mira.
I want to.
Like it's like almost like it is like, nails on chalk, right? Like it's not a beautiful sound by itself, right? Like it literally needs the collaboration of other sounds. Like it
Right.
needs the drum, it needs the accordion, it needs, other things to be happening at the same time. And so I do think like on a very visceral level, I could see like people just be like, go somewhere else with it. I also raised a son who played the violin for a lot of his youth. And
Oh,
again, when you're learning an instrument, it doesn't sound very good, right?
yeah.
And you're playing it because you want to learn, and you don't hear how bad it sounds because you're trying to learn it. So in
Mhm.
a way, like I think this is, yes, it's the Guida, it's very Dominican. It has that layer of meaning, which is sometimes who we are is not always accepted by everyone around us. That could be one way to read it. But it also is that anytime you're doing something outside of the norm, right, that is belongs to you, sometimes not everyone is with you when you're being your full self.
Right. Yeah.
And what I hope, and this book really, one of the inspirations for it was that I do have a young person in my family that I adore, who, she's so beautiful. And she always would think she wasn't so beautiful because she was darker than her friends. And I'm like, but you are so beautiful. You are so smart. You're like, why do you have these self-hating ideas about yourself still in this moment? We're talking, this was 2000 when I started writing the book, it was 2020. I couldn't believe that she was in schools and still comparing herself and still not feeling good about her curly hair and still like and me constantly trying to empower her to just be everything she is and to remind her how beautiful she was. And I said, okay, Angelica is going to look like this little girl. Like I want her to see herself in this story. So it's also about that, right? Like, you know, it's the Güira, but it's the curly hair, it's the skin color, anything that makes you feel outside of a certain context. The moment you start just being with yourself and really honoring who you are is the moment that I think you bring the community that's going to love you toward you. Because again, and I've said this before, is that we're not going to make everybody happy. We're just not. We live in a world that's homophobic, that's sexist, that's racist. But if we learn how to love ourselves and take care of ourselves, we can maybe attract the people that will be like, yeah, play your guida. I'm going to play my drums. Let's see what we could do together. You know what I mean? And I feel like that's also like important to me. And I think that is one of the undercurrents of the book, that it's really about sometimes the communities you want to be with and part of, or the validation that you're trying to get from the outside, you're never going to get that validation.
Yeah.
You're never going to get it. But there are people out there validating you. So look toward them and be, you know what I mean? Like, yeah, like being yourself really allows you to find the right community for you.
Definitely. I love that so much. Thank you, Angie. And um, one of my, I have my question here. One of my greatest takeaways, another takeaway from the book that I got is that, you know, you carry your ancestors with you everywhere you are. And I don't know if it's like this with your family, but after a certain generation, like the information's just not there of what their names were. It's just that part breaks my heart because I only have one living grandparent left, and I actually been meaning to call her soon to be like, what were your great grandparents' names? So to just have that, just to know that there's something about just knowing what their names were like that make you feel like more whole. So I was just curious about, you know, is that something you feel in your own life about, you know, that you carry your ancestors with you, or at least, you know, those who came before you?
I mean, even if I didn't want to carry them, science is proving that they're in our bodies. Ellos están con nosotros, right? Like, even if that's not your belief, we now know on a molecular level, we're bringing a lot of that stuff to us. So I think that, you know, I do think that again, the power of story, and, you know, that we're still able to share stories in whatever capacity. Is it through kitchen talk? Is it through writing? This, you know, is it through reading? Is a way that we're keeping, you know, our ancestors alive with us and present with us. But, you know, I also think, you know, it's interesting while you were speaking, it occurred to me, I was like, oh, you know, my son calls my grandmother mama.
Wow.
I call my grandmother mama. My mother calls my grandmother mama, right? We've all called her mama. The neighborhood calls her mama, right? And I said, I wonder if while you were speaking, I said, I wonder if my son knows her real name, which is Leoncia, right? And probably we never say Leoncia. We'll never say, like, who's gonna say Leoncia among family, right?
Right.
But she's known as Mama. And when I try, yeah, it's been very difficult to get the names of family members beyond my grandmother, right? Because they're like, oh, se llamaba Tatica, or this person, but they're not even their real names. They
Yeah,
were
it's like I know that she wasn't born a Tatica, you know what I mean?
right. Yeah. So then you can't really figure out the documentation and all that. So it is really interesting. But then I was thinking, okay, I know that part of us are really, and I think it's important to document history and the archive, but I also think there's something really beautiful about the idea that mama is just a role in the family, which is like top matriarch, and that it's just respected as so, right? So in some ways, it allows for todos los hijos de crianza that have come into our family, which is also very specific, I think, to certain cultures, right? So yeah, I do think it's interesting. You have me thinking about it now, like the role of naming, but also the ways that names become the role that people take on in the community.
Definitely. And Angie, my last question is, what do you hope readers take away from Angélica and la Güira?
you know, I never know what's going to happen when a book goes out in the world. I hope it brings joy. I hope it encourages, young people and their parents to have more dialogues with each other about objects that matter to them. I hope that, you know, um, more dancing and singing, listening to music, listening to songs we love. And, also like in a lot of ways, I hope that it empowers young people to think about what is the instrument that they have in them, whatever that is. It could be art or music or science or robotics that they love, and them just honoring whatever that is and finding their communities around that. And I think that's what I hope. But funny, already the book is not out yet, right? But I gave a copy to my mother,
Mhm.
and she told me randomly, she goes, "Oh yeah, I've been learning how to play la guira." I said, "What?" She goes, "Yeah, I bought one on Amazon and I started learning." I was like, "Oh my God." It never occurred to me that the book would inspire someone like my mother to try to learn la guira. And then it made me think, oh wait, I should be learning how to play la guira. So that's how I started. But to think that someone might actually pick up the guira and try to, I'm curious. I'm
I love
excited.
it.
I'm
I
excited to
think
see that happen.
I think there's gonna probably be an uptick in Guida lessons. I
I
do
don't
know
know.
that after I read the book, I went to listen to Vamos a Hablar Inglés by Fefita La Grande, and I was like, oh, I love the Guida. So thank you so much, Angie, for speaking with me, and congratulations on just such a beautiful debut picture book. And it's really exciting that you're working on another picture book. And I know you have other things going on. But thank you for taking the time with us at Dominican Writers Association. We really appreciate you.
Well, thank you for everything you're doing, Amaris, for our entire culture. I
Thank
appreciate you.
you.